Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark, and we are in Mark chapter 14. We're going to be starting verse 12 this lesson. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16, Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, Judas has already agreed to betray Jesus to the religious leaders. And now it's time for Jesus and the disciples to partake of the Passover. And it says here, we're going to be looking at verses 12 to 25, which deal with the Last Supper, right? The Last Supper. Verse 12 says, And the first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover, his disciples said unto him, Where will you that we go and prepare that you may eat the Passover? Now it says here, the first day of unleavened bread. The Passover season is also known as the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And this was first established by God in Exodus 12, verses 15 to 20. Let's read that. Exodus 12, verses 15 to 20. And it says here, 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread. Even the first day you shall put away leaven out of your house. For whosoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. And in the first day there shall be a holy convocation, and in the 7th day there shall be a holy convocation to you. No manner of work shall be done in them, except that which every man must eat. That only may be done of you. And you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for in this selfsame day have I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall you observe this day in your generations by an ordinance forever. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. 7 days shall there be no leaven found in your houses, for whosoever eats that which is leavened, even that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he be a stranger or born in the land. You shall eat nothing leavened. In all your habitations shall you eat unleavened bread. Now, leaven was not only not to be eaten, but it wasn't even allowed in the house. Traditionally, on the day before the feast, all yeast was removed from the house and burned. And from that time on, for the next 7 days, the only bread that was to be found in the house was unleavened bread. The first day of unleavened bread marked the first day of Passover. Now, for our understanding, for us to understand it today in our time period, the leaven would be burned on Thursday, and the Passover lamb would be killed and prepared on Thursday afternoon. All right? Remember, on Thursday, when the sun went down, would mark the beginning of the next day, Friday. Remember, in Jewish days, back in these times, I don't know if it's this way today, but the day begins at sundown. All right? So the day begins at sundown. So sundown on Thursday would mark the first day of leaven, which would be Friday. It was Thursday after dark when the unleavened bread and the lamb would be eaten. The lamb eaten would be known as the Passover lamb because it was when God saw the blood on the blood of the lamb on the doorpost, right? And on the lintel. The death angel would pass over. Now the Hebrew word for Passover means to hop, like to jump over. So it was going from house to house to house. So the death angel would pass over from house to house, and that death angel was looking at the doorposts. And if the angel saw blood on the lintel and the two side posts, it would hop over to the next house. If it didn't see it, it would go on inside and kill the firstborn inside the house. Now, verses 13 to 15 says, "And he sends forth 2 of his disciples, and he said unto them, Go into the city, and there shall meet you a man bearing a pitcher of water, and follow him. And wheresoever he shall go in, say to the good man of the house, The master says, Where is the guest chamber, where I shall eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large upper room, furnished and prepared. There make ready for us." Now, the 2 disciples spoken of here is seen in Luke chapter 22 and verse 8, and it's Peter and John. So Jesus sent Peter and John to on this mission here. And it seems that what is written in this verse is that Jesus had already made arrangements for this specific room. Now, with tens of thousands of people coming from all over Israel, and even from Gentile nations, it would be imperative that this would be set up in advance. And we see this in the Greek for the word guest chamber. All right, where we see the word guest chamber, we see that it has been prepared. There is a first person pronoun in the genitive case which modifies this Greek word. Therefore, it should say my guest chamber, right? My guest chamber, probably meaning the one that Jesus had made arrangements for. So let me find that. Okay, verse 14. "And wherever he shall go in, you shall say to the good man of the house, The master saith, Where is the guest chamber?" Or where is my guest chamber? Right? Where I shall eat the Passover. So it seems that Jesus had made arrangements for a specific place to eat the Passover with his disciples. And then it says, where the guest chamber is, where I shall eat the Passover with my disciples. And then it says in verse 15, "And he will show you a large upper room furnished and prepared." Furnished and prepared. Now, the Greek word for prepared is in the perfect tense. It's a perfect participle. And it means that the room was already in a state of readiness. All right, it was already in a state of readiness. The couches and the table were already in place, and there was no leaven in the house. So Jesus must have, whether it was a day or two, or who knows, maybe a week or two beforehand, Jesus somehow had made arrangements for this room to be prepared so that he and his disciples could eat the Passover there. And it would be necessary because again, there's multitudes, thousands of people coming into Jerusalem to celebrate this Passover and to partake of the Passover feast. And they're coming from parts of Israel and also from other Gentile nations nearby that they can come there. So there's a lot of people coming in. There's not going to be many rooms available. Verse 16 says, "And his disciples went forth, and they came into the city, and they found as Jesus had said unto them, and they made ready the Passover." Now, it says they made ready the Passover. Now, Jesus had every intention of eating the Passover lamb. Therefore, Jesus sent his disciples on ahead to make everything ready. The Passover meal would consist of a lamb which would be killed in the temple. Then it would be brought home to the upper room, right? If you were family, you would bring it home. But in Jesus's case, it was going to be brought to this upper room and roasted. There would also be unleavened cakes, bitter herbs, and 4 or 5 cups of wine for this Passover meal. All of these things would be prepared by the disciples. The room was prepared, but the details, the part of the meal was Jesus is sending Peter and John there to deal with the lamb and getting the lamb there, and probably the wine and the unleavened bread and the bitter herbs and the cakes, the unleavened cakes. Jesus was sending his disciples there to get these things ready. All of these things would be prepared by the disciples during the day, and then they would go to where Jesus was and bring him to the feast. So Jesus sends his Peter and John to get the details of the meal. The room was prepared, but the meal wasn't. So Jesus is sending them to prepare the meal and get it ready. And once it's ready, then they would come to where Jesus and the other disciples were, and they would bring Jesus to the upper room to have the meal. Now, verse 17. "And in the evening, he comes with the 12. Now, it says in the evening, and the lamb was to be eaten in the evening, right? Just after sunset, because that was what God had determined, as we read in Exodus chapter 12, what God had determined. It was to be eaten in the evening. And then it says he comes with the 12, and this means that Judas must have made his way after Judas agreed to betray Jesus to the scribes, to the religious leaders, scribes and Pharisees. Judas must have made his way back to Jesus and the other disciples. All right. So, and then, of course, Jesus and the 12, go to this upper room to have the meal. All right. And we're going to continue on in verse 18, and then we'll finish this lesson in verse 18. "And as they sat and did eat, Jesus said, Verily, I say unto you, one of you which eats with me shall betray me." Right? So he says, one of you which eats with me. Now, the betrayer is one who is right there at the table with Jesus. He looks like a friend, and he looks like a companion to the other 11 disciples. But the heart of the betrayer is laid open to Jesus, who sees and he knows all. So Judas is there, and the disciples don't know what's going to happen with Judas and how they don't know nothing about this betrayal. And Judas, in the midst of these other disciples, he looks like a friend. He looks like a companion. But Jesus sees the heart. Jesus sees the heart. And as I said in an earlier lesson, we were not created by God with the ability to hide anything from him. God never created us. He created nothing, even the animals and things. God created nothing with the ability to be able to hide anything from God. Not even the fallen angels or Satan himself can hide anything from God. Your thoughts are even known to God. God, the Bible says, God knows our thoughts afar off, weeks and months, and he knows our thoughts probably before we were even born. He knows that we're going to be born and all our whole life, everything. We don't have the ability to hide anything. So Jesus sees Judas's heart. And it says, verse 18, one who eats with me shall betray me. And Jesus also mentioned this in John chapter 13, verses 10 and 21, during the washing of the disciples' feet, right? During the Passover meal. So we're going to continue on in verse 19 next lesson, all right? But until then, walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.